Welcome to the truth behind the curse of Canaan, Genesis 9 Reexamined. This 10-part series takes a closer look at one of the most misunderstood passages in the Bible, Genesis 9:20-27. We will re-examine the curse on Canaan, challenge long-held assumptions, and uncover what the text really says when we return to the Hebrew language and let the structure, language, and logic speak for itself. Let's begin. Part 1 of the truth behind the curse of Ham, Genesis 9, Re-examined. Introduction. The passage in Genesis 9:20-27, Noah's so-called curse of Canaan, has been a source of deep theological confusion and misapplication for centuries. Traditionally, this text has been read as Ham's offense and Canaan's punishment, an interpretation that has passed largely unquestioned through church pulpits, seminaries, and commentary traditions. But is this truly what the text says? This video offers a critical reassessment of that narrative, verse by verse, through a lens of biblical linguistics, manuscript evidence, and historical coherence. We'll examine the original Hebrew text, scrutinize translation choices, and highlight how later traditions, including Aramaic interpretations and post-biblical commentaries, may have obscured the actual dynamics at play. Contrary to the conventional reading, this study proposes that Ham is never directly confronted, never rebuked, and that the real agent of disruption may, in fact, be Japheth, often viewed as the favored son. Through a reanalysis of the Hebrew root pth, patah, in Genesis 9:27, typically translated as enlarge, we'll explore how it may more accurately mean entice, deceive, or seduce. This subtle but powerful shift dramatically alters the flow and focus of the entire passage. We'll also revisit the genealogical structure of Noah's sons, arguing from the biblical order, the Book of Jubilees, and the Genesis Apocryphon, that Japheth, not Ham, was the youngest son, which adds further weight to a misdirected curse. And finally, we'll examine ancient manuscript fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls that suggest the word tent in Genesis 9:27 should actually be understood as land, implying territorial encroachment, not peaceful dwelling. The absence of confrontation, rethinking Ham's guilt and Canaan's curse. What if I told you that the most infamous curse in the Bible was never properly justified, that the man blamed for it may never have even been confronted, that another figure, long considered innocent, might have pulled the strings? 1. The problem with the traditional narrative. Genesis 9:20-27 presents a troubling scene. Noah plants a vineyard, becomes drunk, and lies uncovered in his tent. Ham, we are told, sees the nakedness of his father, and shortly after, Noah curses not Ham, but his son Canaan. That's it. No rebuke, no explanation, no trial. Just a curse. In traditional Christian and rabbinic interpretations, this seeing is often exaggerated into a sexual transgression, voyeurism, castration, or incest. Yet none of this is plainly stated in the text. The justification for the curse is murky at best. And most glaring of all, there is no confrontation between Noah and Ham. This is not a minor omission. In the biblical tradition, moral failings, especially within family structures, are typically followed by a direct reckoning. But here, the offender walks free, the innocent is cursed, and the father remains silent. Why? 2. A closer look at the Hebrew text. Let's take a closer look at Genesis 9:22. The verse says, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father." In Hebrew it reads, Vayar cham avi Canaan et ervat aviv. Vayar, he saw. A neutral verb, no action beyond looking. Et ervat aviv literally means the nakedness of his father. Here, Ham doesn't uncover or expose Noah. He merely sees. But in Hebrew, nakedness, erva, doesn't just mean someone without clothes. In other parts of the Bible, it can mean sexual shame, dishonor, or even a sexual act, depending on the context. So the verse doesn't explain exactly what Ham saw or did. It's vague on purpose. The text never says he spoke, touched, or moved. The verse says Ham saw the nakedness of his father. The Hebrew verb there is vayar. It just means he saw. It's a neutral word. There's no violence, no sexual act, no uncovering dot. It doesn't say Ham did anything, just that he saw. And Noah never even speaks to Ham. He never confronts him. That's highly unusual in biblical stories. If a son disrespects his father, the father usually responds directly. There is no confrontation, and no explanation about Ham. 3. Contrast with other confrontation narratives. The Hebrew Bible is not subtle when addressing sin, especially within the patriarchal lineage. Compare Genesis 9 to these examples. Genesis 3. Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit. God immediately confronts both, demanding accountability. Genesis 4. Cain kills Abel. God seeks him out directly and punishes him personally. Genesis 35, 22, 49, Reuben sleeps with Jacob's concubine. Jacob eventually confronts Reuben, stripping him of his birthright in front of his brothers on his deathbed. But in Genesis 9, there is no mention of Noah speaking to Ham. No punishment was directly applied to the alleged wrongdoer. Instead, the narrative skips straight to a curse, not of Ham, but of his youngest son, Canaan. This isn't just a narrative oversight. It's a deliberate narrative gap, and gaps in Scripture always demand interpretation. Something is being left unsaid. 4. Possible explanations for the silence. So why the silence? Possibility 1. Ham is guilty, but Noah is too ashamed or incapacitated to confront him. This seems weak. The same text has Noah pronouncing a complex prophetic curse. He clearly has agency. Possibility 2. Ham didn't commit a serious offense. This explains the lack of confrontation but doesn't explain the harsh curse on Canaan. Possibility 3. The wrong person is being blamed, and the text is subtly pointing elsewhere. This is where the possibility of Japheth's involvement becomes critical. Later in the passage, Genesis 9:27 contains a strange and possibly mistranslated blessing. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. But the Hebrew word yept, from the root pth, or patha, is ambiguous. While traditionally translated as enlarge, the Hebrew verb patha, carries meanings such as entice, deceive, or seduce in every other context throughout the Hebrew Bible, except this one. This verb appears approximately 28 times, often conveying notions of persuasion, enticing, seduction, or deception. In Genesis 9:27, the phrase, "May God enlarge Japheth," uses the Hebrew root patha. Given the broader semantic range of this verb, some scholars suggest that entice, persuade, or deceive might be more contextually appropriate translations, potentially altering the interpretation of the passage. See Judges 14:15, Ezekiel 14:9. Again, in all other contexts, it describes deceit, entice, seduction, manipulation, even coercion. If Japheth enticed or seduced Canaan, figuratively or literally, then Canaan becomes a victim of a different kind of manipulation. This would explain why the curse falls on Canaan, not as punishment for Ham's voyeurism or sexual indecency with his mother, but as fallout from a deeper betrayal orchestrated by Japheth. 5. Theological implications. Why does this matter? Because the curse on Canaan has been one of the most politically and racially weaponized texts in history. Church fathers, colonial theologians, and pro-slavery apologists have cited this passage to justify the subjugation of African peoples, tying Ham, and therefore Canaan, to blackness, and framing their servitude as divinely sanctioned. But if the curse wasn't about Ham at all? What if Noah was reacting to something far more complex, where Canaan was manipulated, possibly by Japheth, into some action that the text never explicitly names? And what if the entire interpretive tradition that followed has been built on a deliberate mistranslation? This reframes not only Genesis 9, it reframes centuries of theology, empire, and racial ideology. This concludes Part 1, the absence of confrontation, rethinking Ham's guilt and Canaan's curse in the next installment. Part 2, debunking the sexual sin theories, will critically examine the claims of sexual misconduct in Genesis 9, challenging traditional interpretations and exploring alternative perspectives. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated.